Hello, hello. So the first thing I would like to start with when it comes to talking about Thai Buddhist magic and animistic traditions is we need to understand the historical context of why animism blended with Buddhism, because there are two very different things. You have a almost structured, I wouldn't call it religion, but a spiritual science and a very specific practice of devotion, and all these different precepts that kind of go into it with the monks, and then you have these path workings that people have to take to achieve states of enlightenment or to practice the Dhamma, and usually that is administered through the Sangha. The Sangha are the monks. So the first thing I like to start with in any time I do something like this is a homage to the Triple Gems, as it's called, and that is the recitation of the homage to the Triple Gems, and that's just saying it 3 times. So that's Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Sammasambuddhassa, Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Sammasambuddhassa, Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Sammasambuddhassa. And so what we're saying right there is we're giving our thanks, respect, and appreciation for the Buddha, the one who brought the way, the one who showed us the way, the Sangha, the ones who teach the way, the monks, and then you have the Dhamma, which is the way. So that is where we'll start right there. So in 14th century Thailand, you had Siam changing over into Thailand, and we had this introduction of Nat worship, which came from Burmese traditions where they would worship the coconuts and you had the spirits, and they had this whole very wholesome and organic way of spirit worship that kind of got mixed in when Buddhism started to take over. And so you started to see in Theravada specifically, which is the tradition that we find in Thailand, there's what is called Wicca. Wicca are these classifications of magical systems. One of those that tends to be my favorite is the Hun Paon. So Hun Paon, they were originally these straw figures that the farmers would make, and a jarn, which I am a Thai jarn, and that is an occult professor. So not a monk, not a holy man per se, but kind of like a teacher, a shaman, somebody who has magical practice and experience and has that that they share with the people. Kind of like a leader in some ways, but not what you would deem as like a monk or a holy man. And with the Hun Paon, they would take these collective mind stream, or this energy, this universal life force. In Tibetan Bonpo, we talk about a tulpa, right? Or in Wiccan pagan traditions, you have like servitors, egregores, like ceremonial magic. In Judaic, magical practices, you have the golem. So these are spiritual, entities that go into a living effigy, essentially, is what you're creating there. And the Hun Paon is the Thai equivalent of that. So these farmers, they would have these lay people with magic, or these Thai shamans, these ajarns, and these monks even, that would use the kata, which is like the mantra, the prayer, and the reverberations of their voice, the tones, the specific intentions, and the very structure of these spells would kind of imprint what we would call a quantum template of the intention and thought. And I'll explain a little bit more of that in depth, but what these were designed to do was to ward off bandits, was to prevent like fires in your fields, were to kind of protect the land in the same way that a lot of people will use like a security system, or they'll have like a shotgun or gun at home for safety and protection. A lot of these villagers in these rural areas especially were so poor that they did not have access to anything other than like a pitchfork or candlelight or something like that, especially when we're going back a couple hundred years or so. And so they would use the power of these amulets as their sole means of protection, which is a very animistic property to it. And when it started to grow more and more with Buddhism, we found that the monks were starting to integrate it, and that's when you got what are called like sampoi, which is like a cleansing ritual or ceremony. You have waikru, which is a consecration and a blessing ceremony. And a lot of times you'll notice the monks, they'll actually use elements of magic, but without calling it magic. In Thailand, they actually call it the power. The term that they'll use is they say the monks will use the power. They'll bless you with the power. What they're talking about is the magic, the Buddhist magic. They just don't use that terminology. And it's the same with when they're talking about certain concepts like black magic and white magic. It's all intention based. Black magic in the Thai traditions falls under what we would call Thai Barang, which is anything that has to do with human material or prey, as it may be called. Some Hunpeon will actually be composed of prey material, It doesn't necessarily mean that it's dark, it doesn't mean that it's good, that's the intention behind it. An example is sometimes monks will actually go to the prison, and they'll visit inmates that are on death row who know that they are going to be facing an early demise, and they'll ask their permission if they will allow their soul to kind of be used in this spiritual contract and inhabit this effigy when they pass on, so that they may acquire good merits and good karma, so that their next incarnation can be a higher incarnation, so that they don't have to fully force the bad karma. And it's not that they get away with it, they still have to work that off. And so the way that works off is, as you're inhabiting the spirit vessel as a spirit inside of it, you're working for whoever the owner is, you're helping this person, you're protecting them, you're benefiting their life. And what is that owner doing for you in return as the spirit in this vessel? They're sharing their merit with you. And that's what we call making tambun. And making tambun is when you do good deeds. Like you might free animals that are trapped, or in an abuse situation. You might help people who are impoverished or without a home. Just things in general, like feeding the monks, bringing donations to temples, or just helping one another in this world. These are good deeds that we do for the sake of doing a good deed, not for what we can get from it. And when we do those good deeds, when we make tambun and we dedicate those good deeds to the spirit in our spirit statue, whether it be a Pai statue, a Hunpeon, or whatever equivalent of that is residing within the statue, you're sharing that merit with the spirit. And the spirit then takes that merit and it becomes its merit. But it doesn't diminish the merit from yourself, which I find to be really unique, in the sense that a lot of times when you divide and you share something, it becomes watered down, or it becomes lesser. But when we're sharing this merit, when we're making tambun and we're sharing these good deeds with what would be considered like bad spirits, or like neutral Thai spirits in like Thai traditions, it's not getting watered down. If anything, it's expanding the vibration of that good deed. It's like they say, the ripple effect. So I'm going to read something that kind of explains, this is from my magic blog, and this is an explanation behind the foundations of science, where it mixes with magic, and it explains more about what I was talking about with the Hunpeon and how these amulets have this intrinsic power to protect people, and why the Thai people in general believe so firmly in Thai magic. And this is from my website, which is www.thesadhudah.com. My booth is booth 18 over there at the front. I have cards up there, and this is one of my free blog articles. I put a bunch out, have YouTube videos. I love to teach stuff for free and put it out there, but I also do take students as well. Many people often wonder where magic ends and science begins, or vice versa. The two are not exclusively separate. Many a time someone made the comment that magic is just a technology we don't fully understand yet. While that may be true in some regards, we can actually say that much is known about magic in regards of observable effect in a scientific setting. The Vedics spoke of metaphysical concepts, the paranormal, and magic, thousands of years ago, same as the Taoists and varying shamans of numerous indigenous cultures. What did they understand that modern science is just now coming to an understanding of today? Experiment 1. Vladimir Puponin is the owner of Nanophotonics Biosciences, Inc. He's also a highly respected quantum physicist known worldwide for his contributions in quantum biology. He has established a vast amount of research into the nonlinear dynamics of DNA and the interactions of weak electromagnetic fields with biological systems. He conducted an experiment in the early 90s and demonstrated human DNA can affect the photons around it. This means that human DNA can affect light particles. E equals mc squared, we've all heard this, right? The famous equation that Einstein discovered tells us in combination with Puponin's research that all matter is composed of light and can be manipulated by other light particles. In his experiment, Puponin had a glass tube with all the air removed to create a vacuum, and all that remained were photons, the light particles. He then went on to measure the distribution of the photon particles in the tube while in a vacuum state. Puponin validated the distribution of the photon particles was entirely random. He then introduced human DNA inside the tube. Only this time, when the photons were measured, there was a pattern present, meaning the photons were aligning and positioning according to the presence of human DNA. They actually aligned along the axis of the DNA. This would indicate that in some ways the photons had to have been aware of the introduction of the human DNA. Removing the DNA from the tube presented interesting results as well. The photons didn't return to behaving randomly. They behaved as if the DNA was still present in the tube. The photons maintained the aligned structure of the DNA, which means the DNA must have left an energetic imprint once removed. This phantom DNA energy field was continually observed and kept the photons in place for a month. What I find truly remarkable is that Puponin even blasted liquid nitrogen into the tube to disrupt the photons, and it only lasted temporarily before they realigned with the phantom DNA. And it only took the photons less than 10 minutes to achieve this. But what does this mean though? This is just a bunch of jargon and science research, right? I'll tell you what it means. When we talk about chi, prana, mana, energy, and the chakras, and meridians, we're talking about a complex energy body that fuels the physical body. The results of Puponin's experiment tell us that we have an energy body capable of existing and operating outside the limits of physical containment. When the human DNA was removed in the experiment, the photons remained in communication with the DNA. This means physical matter can be absent and a bioenergetic connection can still be maintained because it is working with the greater energy field with which all matter is connected to. Using this knowledge, we can explain residual hauntings, the imprint of energy on a land that turns sour, holy spots all over the world, and why some people can sense a presence without being able to see it. Ghosts are even worth mentioning here. Ghosts are composed of energy, and that is why they can interact with energy fields of other living beings and physical matter. They are manipulating the photons within a specified field to create a specific effect, which seems otherworldly, but they're merely following the laws of physics and the principle of energetic exchange. If enough energy is condensed, those photons become more visible, and this explains why we can see manifestations of ghosts sometimes. And we can also note that phantom DNA staying in place for a month lines up with the monthly lunar cycles, and how in some magical practices of amulet and talisman crafting, energies are consecrated and laid on top of one another to induce a specific effect, which is just the amulet or talisman resonating, like I talked about with the Hunpeon, with the specific or wider fields of influence to achieve the determined effect for the person holding or within reach of the harmonized energies, who then joins their energetic field to this constructed field of energy. Pretty amazing stuff, right? Well, there's two other experiments I want to talk about. In Experiment 2, the US military took DNA samples from willing subjects. Maybe they weren't, but they said they were. We'll just leave it at that. The DNA was then separated from the donor. Once the DNA was separated, the donor was subjected to emotionally stimulating imagery. The experiment concluded that the separated DNA and the donor responded at exactly the same time to the imagery and emotional simulation. This gives us validation to non-locality and quantum entanglement. But what does this mean, right? When a Tibetan Lama rubs their saliva on an altar or puts a bit of their saliva in a homeopathic remedy, they're using this underlying concept. How? The saliva has their DNA. and the altar is a placeholder for an energetic construct designed to bring specific currents of energy into alignment. And by having the saliva in place, the DNA is being affected by this energetic field, and as such, so does the person the DNA came from. Explaining the saliva in a homeopathic remedy is easy to understand and not so bizarre when we break it down. The Lama has a higher state of consciousness and being. Their energies through cultivation and practice are vibrating with more density and at a higher level. When they take their saliva, which contains this higher density energy, it mixes with the herbs in the tincture or the salve and causes a chain reaction, an alchemical transition. It activates the herbs in their resonance to a higher state. And if these herbs have natural healing properties for the body and mind, then they become enhanced. The military experiment also provides more understanding as to why the Hawaiian kahunas used to bury their feces and hide it from other kahunas. They did this because it has markers of their DNA, and if another kahuna wanted to curse or send negative energetic influence to a kahuna, all they needed was the excrement, because the intended effect applied to it would naturally have a reaction in the person that the excrement originally belonged to. Another example is how a Wiccan might employ witch bottles to distract an enemy trying to bring them harm. A bottle containing a mixture of ingredients, but most importantly hair or nail clippings. Something with their DNA is used to signify to the incoming attack that this is the person. The incoming energy hits the bottle instead of the actual person and breaks the bottle because the bottle has their DNA in it. And experiment 3. The first biomagnetic signal was discovered in 1863 by Gerard Ball and Richard McPhee with a magnet cardiogram, an MCG. It operated by using a series of magnetic induction coils to detect electromagnetic fields generated by a human heart. Since then, we have developed greater sensitivity of biomagnetic measurements thanks to a superconducting quantum interference device dubbed SQUID back in the 1970s. Cardio-electromagnetic communication is the energetic communication occurring from the magnetic fields produced by the heart. The human heart is the most powerful source of electromagnetic energy in the human body. It produces the largest rhythmic electromagnetic field of any organ in the body, including the brain by more than 60 times the amplitude of its electrical activity. That's powerful. The field is measured by an ECG, electrocardiogram, and it can be detected anywhere on the surface of the body. Want to know what's most impressive? The magnetic field of the heart is over 100 times greater in strength than the field generated by our brains, and we can even detect it up to 3 feet away from the body in every direction using squid-based magnetometers. The Institute of Heart Math found that the timing between pulses in the magnetic field of the heart was modulated by varying emotional states. The magnetic signals generated by the heart have the ability to affect people directly around us. What does this mean though? Our heart's magnetic field interacts non-locally with the quantum field. Ever been around someone in a bad mood when you were in a good mood and you had to leave because they were just bringing you down emotionally? Well, how about a guy treating a customer service rep poorly and then they snap at their coworker? This is the transference of conjoined emotional response to rapport. This applies to a hypnotherapist in session with a client just as much as an energy healer performing a cleansing on an individual's aura and chakras. The manipulation of energetic fields with heart coherence is how someone can take their higher state and bring someone in a lower state to resonate with them and drop the baggage of everything not aligned to the higher state. This is also why remote healing is effective. When done correctly, two people can be separated by thousands of miles, but because of heart coherence and quantum entanglement, the magnetic fields connect in the quantum field, allowing a unified experience to manifest in a new reality through co-creation. These 3 experiments provide the scientific foundation and very mechanism of expression behind all magic. Sympathetic magic formula. This is Animism right here. This is my favorite stuff. This is my jam. By using the reverse of how we explore the science, we can outline with a few steps the most reproducible method I have come across for making all magic and healing truly effective. We start with heart coherence. Then we move to non-local awareness, and we finish by creating a quantum template. We have to turn on the car switch to get the vehicle moving. This is generating strong intention and feeling connected to the intention behind using the electromagnetic field of the heart. We use the strong visualization and feeling the manifestation without imposing our will. This is critically the most important thing, without imposing your will, but inviting the new reality to co-create with us in the now. Lastly, we release the attachment to the outcome, and this lets us cross from our own individual experience to a unified experience. We go from subconscious to quantum, and that's really all there is to it. But making that happen for most people will require some form of training and guidance before it can become secondhand nature. But I can tell you right now that all of this is possible for every single person, not even just in this room, but on this planet. No matter what disability they might have been born with, no matter what kind of handicap or challenges that they have going against them, our bodies are these complex structures. They are like mini nuclear reactors. The amount of energy that we can channel through having what are known as sadhanas, so these daily spiritual practices, things like what I do is like I do qigong, right? So a lot of people may be familiar with the term tai chi if they're not familiar with qigong. So that's the type of qigong. So I do these specific movements with intention, and I'm aligning my body with the rotation of the earth and the solar system. I am getting in sync with the Tao as it is. And once I do that, I'm able to allow these energies to cleanse my body, to renew my body, and to charge my body. And then with focused intention and thought, so for me what makes this really easy is knowing a lot of different kata. A lot of these different mantras might be a term that more people are familiar with. In the Thai tradition, we say kata. Kata is what they use, but kata is mantra. They are the same thing. So they're spells, they're chants, they're words with specific vibrations attached to them. Beach symbols or beach seed mantras, very specific sounds that have specific intentions. When you stack them in a certain way, you get these like living prayers. For example, one of my favorites is so Siri Ramye Ramye Ye Ram Krisana Hare Krisana Namahata. So that's the butterfly kata, and that comes from KB Krisana, who is a famous monk from Thailand. And what's really incredible about KB Krisana's meditation practices is that he had no intention of developing this, but he became known as the butterfly monk, or the god of butterflies, the king of butterflies, because he started to tap into these certain states of samadhi, higher states of consciousness. They were so specific that when he would meditate, butterflies would materialize out of nowhere and be seen like swarming all over his body. It's a very incredible sight. Many people have witnessed this. And all of his amulets that he makes have a butterfly on them. So he is known as the butterfly monk. And the more time that he spent in these very specific states of meditation, the butterflies started to reveal things from him. And so the mantra, the kata that I recited, the Siri Ramye Ramye, so that one right there, he said that was spoken to him, that was understood by the butterflies. This was something that butterflies conveyed to him. Well, how do the butterflies speak Pali, like a language of Cambodia, an old language equal to Sanskrit that is only really practiced by monks, like in the Wat? Like, well, what is this nonsense? It's actually very interesting when you think about it. So they took an ancient language that this man had already understood, and through that communication that we talked about, through that transference of universal energy, a subtle inclination of feeling, thought, and experience was transferred from the butterfly's consciousness to the monk. And through that state of neutrality, that monk was absorbing the experience and the consciousness of the butterfly, and was able to translate that into a language he understood, and a language that had power, which then he could call forth the power universally through a quantum template and be able to turn it into a spell. When you think about how incredible that is, it's more than just the man talked to butterflies. It's so much deeper than that. It has so much more of a scientific background than just this man over here talking to butterflies. And it's very incredible because a lot of people are so quick to write off these old traditions, these old ways. Every culture that has ever existed in history has had an older religion, a first religion, and that is what we call the old ways, right? So in the Native Americans, that we took so much from, right? They are practicing an indigenous path working, the same as these Thai animistic traditions. The thing that I find very unique and I appreciate so much about Thai Buddhist magic is that instead of abolishing and taking away and separating the culture of these indigenous teachings, they found a way to integrate it in with the Buddhist philosophy, the Buddhist teachings. They found a way to blend it with the Dhamma. The Sangha themselves, these monks, were able to take these animistic traditions and they were able to apply it to the teachings of the Buddha. And so that's how, when we start talking about using how I said, that the monks, they don't call it magic, they call it the power. So when you go to something like a Waiku ceremony at a Wat, you'll see that they take this white yarn and the monks will be holding a spool of this white yarn. And that white yarn will be tethered around these Buddha statues and will be tethered in these different types of bridge structures. And then they'll be wrapped around people's heads individually. And as the monks are chanting the kata, their mind stream, this universal power that we spoke about earlier, they're transferring it all the way through the yarn. And it's riding through and it's picking up these holy energies in the statues. It's going in this geometric pattern, it's taking on that universal construct right there. And by the time it hits this person who has no idea what they are getting slammed with, just this divine power being installed inside of them, these blessings that the monks are putting on them, it's easy to see that it's just this white yarn. It's just a string. But like I said with the example of the butterflies, it's more than that. It's an intention, it's a vibration, it's a transcendence of what we can even put into words. It has to be expressed through experience. It's something that has to be felt. And when I think about some of my first experiences training, so there were two monks who were very, very pivotal, would be the word? Yeah. In my learning and how I became an Ajarn is Master Thenafo Pakdi and Master Pongsa. These two monks taught me everything I know about Thai animism and Thai Buddhist magic, and they never charged me anything. They gave me all of this so freely. And while I do have students, because a man's got to make a living, right? And I'm not living at the temple, I'm not getting donations. I do have students that pay me, but what I love doing the most is like what I'm doing right here, right now with you folks, is just sharing some of this stuff, giving some of this knowledge, some of this wisdom, some of these teachings back, so that it can help to enrich someone's life today. So that maybe it can kind of get you to the next step of your own spiritual journey. Whether it is branched in Thai Buddhism or Thai, magic or not. Maybe something that I said today will kind of stick with you a little bit and will help you progress in your own way. That's for Spirit to tell you, not for me to tell you. But I like to think that there's something relatable no matter what religion, no matter what background you're coming from. When you're talking just energy, when you're talking something so universal, that's something we all share. It's not discriminatory. The only discrimination comes in yourself blocking it out. And even then, that's still an exchange of energy, so I kind of find that ironic. But now that I've explained more about the amulets, we'll talk about something that's like a little bit more controversial. And also there's a beauty to it that is so taboo in America, but it's so mainstream in Thailand. So we have these pride lockets, and we have like these Gumantong or Luktep Gumari statues. These are statues that have like a child spirit in it, and then like pride is usually like a term for a ghost. It can be non-human, but it's usually a reference to like a human ghost. And it's usually someone that had like a very unfortunate or untimely death, because there's a lot of power in that and energy in that kind of death. And so what they'll do is you'll get these ajarns and these holy men and even monks that will collect prime material. So for example, there's a locket I have in my personal collection, and it's something very dear to me, and I share my merit, I share my good deeds with the spirit quite a bit. And it's her actual picture, and she was a young lady that was a street worker, and I don't shame sex workers at all. I feel like whatever, you feel good about doing, as long as you're not hurting anybody, or yourself ideally, go for it. But this female was a sex worker, and she was unfortunately brutally murdered in an alleyway. So it's a very devastating death. It's very, very emotional for the family, understandably so. They lost their only daughter. She was very young, and they didn't necessarily approve of what she did for work. So what the family decided to do, the way that they could not only get closure, but they could feel better about something good coming from their daughter's death, was they called an ajarn to come. Ajarn Messiah, actually, is his name. He's a very well-respected ajarn. He came and he collected some of her blood. He collected some of her hair, and chinatan, which chinatan is like forehead bone, and he did like the proper ceremonies, the proper kata. He did it so because she died on a Saturday, by the certain wicca that is imposed with that, the rules is that the ceremony has to be carried out on a Tuesday. And there's a lot of complexities to that, but that's more stuff that I get into when I'm teaching. So what they did was they decided that if their daughter was going to be dead regardless, her death was not going to be for nothing. So the best thing that could come out of this was that amulets could be made containing some of the prime material, and her spirit could be within these amulets, and they could help people in meaningful ways. They could protect people, they could make people's lives better, they could ease troubles, they could bring something meaningful from such a catastrophic situation. And in return, for all these people that her spirit is helping, she is gathering good merits. She is gaining good karma, and it is erasing the bad karmas from her life. So that when she is reborn, and her spirit, when it reaches that point, will naturally leave. It's not bound into the amulets. It's abiding by a spiritual contract that's dictated and completely outlined through the wicca, through those kata. It's like a spell book. It has the rules in it, and if the spirit goes by it, then the spirit is agreeing in entering that spirit contract. So then, once it accrues enough merit and good karma, and it reincarnates, boom, those vessels, those amulets become empty, and spirit's no longer within it. So that's something that's very, very taboo. Working with human remains and having a spirit in a statue in America, a lot of people would say necromancy, black magic, they're immediately going to throw a negative connotation to it. But the Thai people do not see it that way. And these monks, who are pinnacles of the communities, who are essentially the celebrities of Thailand, these holy figures, they also make bright amulets. So that must tell you that inherently it must be about intention with the energy, and it must be about intention with the spirit, and not necessarily what we're looking at as so taboo, which is death and being intimate with death, which is something that the Western way just pushes us to ignore or to put on the back burner and not acknowledge, because it's too scary, it's too real, it's too personal, it's taboo, right? Another thing is the Gumintang, the Gumari, the Luktep. So these are the spirit statues that are made with the spirits of small children. What I find very interesting about this is it is conflicting in some ways. So in one way, the old tradition of making them is a little bit too gruesome to go into detail, but essentially the baby was stillborn, or the child died very, very young. And so they would, without going into a lot of detail, they roast the already deceased corpse, and then they cover it in gold foil, and that is, Gumintang means Thailand's little golden boy. That's where that translation comes from, and it references to the old way. So yeah, that's a bit intense, right? So the newer way of doing it is they'll take cremated ash, or they'll actually call the spirit of the child and they'll put it into a little doll, or an effigy that's made in the form of a child. Where this becomes a very interesting way of parents grieving losing their child is they get to raise this child's spirit as if they never lost their child. But there's no delusion about it. This child's not going to grow up. This is a spirit statue. This is not their child other than the spirit. There's no delusion about that. But there's something very cathartic and very healing that many parents who have lost a child in Thailand have spoken about publicly. And when they seek out an Asharn, or they seek out a monk, and they ask them to turn their child into a Gumantang or a Lukta, which is a child angel, which tend to be more prestigious looking casing, but it's literally the same thing. And Gumari is just the female equivalent of a Gumantang. Gumantang's a boy, Gumari is a girl. So these parents will talk about how they know that their child's never coming back, but just being able to connect with them and be close to the spirit of their child. And a lot of the processes that go into like the ritual worship and caring for the Gumantang is like you give it children's toys and you invite it to share in your meals. And when you send it on task and you ask it to go and do things for you, you reward it with things like, milk and like, little baby toys and things of that nature, and maybe clothes. So in a way, they do kind of get to raise their child. Not fully, but I'm sure any of you here could understand how that could be a very cathartic process for a grieving parent. And a very interesting approach of magic, and how that can kind of blend with psychological healing, with just being able to process that death over time by working with the spirit statue. I guess at this point, let's see, I'd like to just kind of open up if anybody had any questions, or just wanted to ask something about just Thai Animism, Thai Buddhist magic in general. Yeah, that's actually a really good question. So more about my booth and what I offer at my booth. So I have a lot of like different amulets that I've made, which are made with the proper wicca and through the instruction of my masters who I studied under. I did it in those ancient traditional ways. And then I also have a lot of different temples that I have as like resources and connections with that I private order things from. So I have a lot of authentic Thai amulets from Thailand as well. I do have spirit statues. I have like Fa Yant cloths, which would basically, like my shirt is like a Fa Yant like spell, right? With Tawesuan, super cool god. So anyways, yeah, I have just like a variety of different amulets. I also do offer like some meridian dredging and mantra saturation. So basically like, an energy healing, but in a different way than you're probably used to experiencing. That's available as well as cards for my website, which is kind of like my biggest resource. If you end up not choosing to buy an amulet, I invite you to take a card. Look at my YouTube channel. I have a lot of like rituals up there. I have a lot of things that I put out there for free as resources. Same with my magic blog, like what I read at the very beginning. That's just one of my blogs. I have over 40 that I've written so far that are all up, and they're very in-depth. I teach a lot of things for free as well. So, yeah, share the love. And I guess we'll just wrap it there. If nobody has any questions, thank you so much for joining me. Booth 18, I'm right at the front. Yep. Okay.